Good morning, friends. Good morning. My colleagues on the dais, Chandrajit, Vivek, Mr. Pandey. When we have a services conference, I think the first thing required for services is energy and josh. So let's get it into our moods this morning. And as I come from Mumbai, I'm really delighted that the levels of pollution in Delhi have significantly dropped and things are looking better. Friends, inevitably when we talk about services, the natural starting point to talk about is the Western world, or how well the Western world has done in services, where does India stand, how does India compete in services, mainly with the Western world. I would like to shift the focus a bit and talk about services not standalone, but in the context of GDP growth of a country, and more importantly, jobs and per capita. And therefore, I will start eastwards. If you go back to the 70s, India and China were more or less at the same levels of per capita GDP. And China was coming out of a very extreme leftist reality post-Mao. And India was also a pretty closed economy. And if you look at mid to late 70s, China took a turn and took a very, very significant turn towards growth of manufacturing. And this is the game of 70s and the 80s. And China really went out there, started with what was effectively low-cost jobs, captured jobs, and manufacturing produced some of the most competitive manufacturing. And at that stage, and I'm sure Mr. Pandey has a view on that, the world was more benign for a developing country. And I think US at that stage, if you remember the Kissinger times, was actually in love with wanting to build a romance with China. And China took full advantage of it. It really produced manufacturing and went out and sold it to America. And through the 80s and 90s, that led to a phenomenal manufacturing-led growth in China. In India, things happened by default. Of course, in 1985, we saw a new government under Rajiv Gandhi, which wanted to seriously open up India, and thereafter the major reforms of 92 and the history since then. But the services sector, a lot of the services sector in India happened under the radar because the government was so focused on the planned economy and thought about the economy only in terms of industry and agriculture. The services sector effectively found its growth by default. You saw the development of IT services in the mid to late 90s, and you talk to most of the IT entrepreneurs. They said it happened because government was not looking at us, and we were able to grow because we were very much under the radar. And this kind of growth of the services sector has actually propelled us. But despite this growth, which has been, a lot of it historically has been by default, India lags behind in the total growth compared to China. And I was speaking at another place and I said that for India to reach China's per capita GDP today, India will have to grow at 9% per annum for the next 20 years to get to where China is today. So we have a big challenge. And in that context, I do commend the fact that we are trying to play the catch-up or the growth game in manufacturing. Therefore, I don't think the growth in services is got any disconnect with the growth in the Make in India philosophy, because I think we have to play the catch-up game in manufacturing. But services is our competitive advantage. And I'll just read out some of the statistics of today. 60% of India's GDP is services, and a sector that virtually grew by default. 30% of India's exports is services. And close to 30% of India's jobs is services. And this is where the disconnect is. We are 60% of GDP, but only 30% of jobs. And in a political economy, for services to be counted, we need a lot more jobs. And I would strongly welcome, during the deliberations of the day, what is it that we can do that while we propel the services growth, we increase the share of jobs in the total jobs from 30 to 40%. And that's one of our challenges. Where in services can we get higher growth into GDP, but also create disproportionately larger jobs? Therefore, one of the agendas which we must, as a people of this country and as CII, take up is services should be the creation of jobs engine in addition to other aspects of the economy. And I think the very important aspect of services in a connected world and a broadband world is it can dramatically reduce the urban-rural divide. In the context of the noise of politics, which all of us have been going through for the last few weeks, the biggest soundbite is, even now, in the 21st century, a rural-urban divide. I think the services economy and the connected economy can actually bridge this huge divide for our future. Having said that, if I look at the absolute numbers, the growth is stunning. India's service exports in 2001-2 were about $1.7 billion, or $17 billion, sorry. It was $17 billion. It's now $163 billion in 16-17. So that's a very significant growth which we have seen. India's share in services GDP in the world has moved up over the last 14 years from 1.1% to 3.2%. So we are a bigger share of the global services pie than in any other aspect. Therefore, a growth in services combined by a growth in jobs and growth in exports is extremely crucial. And I keep on asking myself this question on why is service exports so crucial to India? And the question is simple. For my entire life, if I think about the current account deficit, like the P&L of India, and which is funded by the balance sheet, which is debt and equity, India has had a loss-making P&L on the account of current account forever. So even with oil at $50 average this year, okay, it's right now at 60 plus, we still have a current account deficit which is likely to be 1.5 to 2% of GDP. Therefore, effectively what it means is out of our P&L, we are not able to pay for ourselves. And manufacturing exports, of course, but what is going to propel this ability of India to match its books on P&L? I think it has got to be service exports. Because finally, the strength of a nation is not being dependent on foreign debt or foreign equity. We should do it from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness. And if we want a position of strength in foreign debt and foreign equity, rather than needing it for filling up our hole, India has to get competitive on its exports, net of its imports. And for the foreseeable future, I do not see India on the import side getting out of its oil dependency. And therefore, we need services to drive our earnings and balance the P&L of India on the current account. Some of our fast-growing areas for the last 20 years have been IT and BPO. It's a phenomenal story. If you look at the IT services growth in India, from an industry which did not exist in 1995 to now being a $100 billion plus export industry, that's a phenomenal success by any stretch of imagination. But there are dangers there. I think with AI, robotics, and everything else coming in, the number of new jobs in IT services is not going to grow as fast as it did in the past. I do hope we still continue to add jobs, but the speed and the rate of growth is certainly going to be slower. And the rate of revenue growth is also going to be impacted, because you just have to read something or other in the papers. A Nike factory in Germany now hires robots. It doesn't hire human beings at all. So with this kind of change, a very significant part of our services exports is IT services, which started once upon a time as body shop, has now done significant value add over time, but still it's very manpower dependent, and some of the parts of BPO and IT are easily replaceable by robots. We see in our own bank, we are replacing at call centers by bots, which will be machines, which are answering human beings. So the speed at which services jobs in IT and BPO will certainly slow down. Where is the potential? I think health, tourism, education. Huge potential. Media, entertainment, sports, leisure, wellness. In our internal council meeting, I was saying, look at the power of sports, media, and entertainment, that a company is ready to write a check of 16,500 crores for 5-year IPL rights. Tell me which manufacturing company would be ready to pay for thin air 16,500 crores upfront as a commitment for 5 years of rights for IPL, which is a sport. But that is the beauty about the services industry. I think sports is a very integral part of services. Sports, leisure, wellness, entertainment. Many of us, including in industry associations, don't even consider these as businesses. It's time, CB, we need to have a separate services council for sports. My own example, a few years ago, I was thrust upon a kabaddi team, which was just going to start up. And now it's probably the second fastest growing sport after cricket in India. A very local sport. So what are we doing? I see Jalaj here. His son is a table tennis champion and he's a passionate follower of sports. But I'm saying the whole area of sports, entertainment, wellness, leisure, people are going to have a lot more time. How are they going to spend it? So the whole services industry around leisure, around training, your personal trainer. I was recently reading a report in The Economist saying 10 years from now, which are the jobs which are most likely to be protected and the jobs which are most likely to get lost. So pardon my comments to some of the chartered accountants in the room, but the jobs most likely to get lost are accountants who balance books, because machines will do it. The number one job, which is not going to be replaced 10 years from now, is the job of a dentist. And the second most protected job is the job of the personal trainer. So you are seeing a whole new environment which is now being built, which is creating a whole new era of services. And it is here that India has a huge ability, because we are fundamentally entrepreneurs. We are very good at startups. We like to have our own little outfit, and we need to grow it. I mean, you just look at tourism, and Vivek is here, and he's always talked about with passion on tourism. I think we're getting a very small drop of the global tourist pie. We need to transform that. And I think it requires a lot of stuff. I mean, I know for a fact we need to take care of a lot of areas. So I think